Well, you went to Canberra, of course, with a big mandate to do something about climate change, as well as, of course, the mandate you had after defeating Tony Abbott. One of the things that really interested me, in your maiden speech to Parliament, you said, "I refuse to be part of a generation that had all the facts on climate change but failed to take meaningful action." When did you first feel that real sense of personal responsibility that you had to act?
The minute I nominated to stand for Warringah, that I was putting myself on the line to come forward with solutions, to come forward with being a voice to cut through the noise that we have from the major parties on climate change and on policy, to actually put forward some sensible solutions. I talked to a lot of universities. I got a lot of scientists to assist as well in terms of understanding what were the key features we need in that legislation. Because what was really important for me was it's not just the mitigation piece of needing to reduce emissions as quickly as we can, right? It is also accepting that we've baked in a lot of warming already. To stay under 2 degrees, it's going to be a difficult trajectory, and that does mean increasing natural disasters and major impacts. So we have to have that risk assessment piece. So the climate bill is structured so that we have overarching guiding principles, but then a major section is the risk assessment across all our communities, our sectors, our employment. We just don't have that at the moment. And then if you're going to assess risk, you have to develop adaptation plans to meet those risks.
Many blue-collar workers, of course, in the coal and gas regions of Australia, especially like the Hunter Valley and Queensland's coalfields, will say that this will kill their jobs and their communities. You have accused the National Party of selling fantasies to these communities by saying the fossil fuel industry will continue forever, or at least for a long time into the future. But has anyone really come up with a plan for these workers and their families?
Ironically, my family comes from the Hunter Valley. My dad was from Cessnock and my mum was from Maitland. And in fact, my dad's father worked in Cessnock until the mines closed and as a lawyer and had to move out. So I absolutely am concerned about those communities. It's actually concern for those communities that drives me, that they have no plan. There is no insurance policy for those communities. The world is moving away from fossil fuels, whether you like it or not, whether you accept the risks of global warming and climate change and the impact of fossil fuels. The question is, what is the plan for what's next? What will those communities thrive on next? What do we need to put in place to ensure that in 3 years, 5 years, 8 years, when those jobs are finished, those new industries are there and ready to take on? We know we have the opportunity and we need to bring manufacturing back onshore. But that doesn't happen overnight. You need a plan to implement it. And we can't just be in a situation for those communities where they get told that in 2 years' time that mine is closing by the owners, and they need to know a plan is in place.
Well, despite the setbacks that you've had, I do want to talk to you about one very positive win you had with a few other people in something called the PEP 11 campaign. Can you tell us briefly about PEP 11 and why it's fired up so many people in your community?
Absolutely. This is such a great example of community engagement and willpower making such a difference. So PEP 11 is an exploration licence for oil and gas off the coast between Newcastle to all the way down to Manly, a huge area, in some areas as close to 5 kilometres from the coast and up to 30 kilometres away. It is a licence that had been in existence for some time, but it was being reactivated by the licence holder and wanted an extension. The Minister for Resources, Keith Pitt, a national from Queensland, not overly concerned about our waters off the east coast, is very pro expanding gas. So very important to our communities to absolutely block this project. And despite assurances by local members and by even the Prime Minister, this was lingering. And while state government stepped up and said no, and said they wouldn't extend that licence, federal government dragged it on for a long time. Ultimately, to call it to a head, I presented a private members bill that would reject the licence and make it impossible to have any future licences. called for a suspension of standing orders for members to vote for us to deal with that immediately. And shortly after, we have now seen the project, the extension declined, and there will be no oil or gas exploration off our coast, which is a great win for the community. I think what it showed, though, is as a community, we're incredibly lucky. We have such a beautiful local environment we have the benefit of. And especially through COVID, we've seen how that has been an intrinsic part of keeping us healthy. And our mental well-being, hugely important. And for people to stop taking their natural environment for granted and actually step up and fight for it, stand up and say, no, we won't allow you to just traipse all over this, put it at risk with oil and gas exploration. But we need to remember, you can't just take a stand for what's in your backyard. We need to think of the whole picture of Australia and all those other environments that are at risk if we continue exploration, especially gas exploration.
Looking back on your first term as a MP, in your maiden speech, you also quoted a famous American writer, Edward Everett Hale, on the power of the individual, and you said, "I am only one, but I'm still one. I cannot do everything, but I can still do something." Do you still believe this, or do you think your experience in the Parliament has actually changed your view on the power of one?
Oh, no, I am more convinced than ever the power of one is ultimately what will bring change about. I saw votes in Parliament that hinged on one vote. Come and go, to get change, to put amendments to legislation. So I know around climate and global warming, people feel a huge amount of anxiety. The problem is so big, it is so large. How can we break it down into something we can influence? This is how I believe we can do it. Understand where you can make a difference. Your number one most powerful tool is your vote. Who represents you in the decision-making tables is how we will make the ultimate difference. So I think the power of one is the ultimate, because it's ultimately the strongest force of all.